Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
Ilara had always been a force of nature. That's what I used to tell people. What I used to tell myself. She managed our lives with a kind of effortless grace, or what looked like it from the outside. She worked her full-time job. She took care of our two kids, Liam and Maya, and she still somehow found the energy to keep our house from descending into chaos. I admired that about her, truly. I loved her for it. But love, I was learning, could curdle in the silence. Over time, our life together had settled into a rhythm so predictable it had become monotonous. A silent melody played on repeat. The alarm would go off at 6 a.m. We'd move around each other in the kitchen like two ghosts, preparing breakfast, packing lunches. We'd divide the day's responsibilities with clipped, efficient phrases. I'll get Maya from school. Don't forget the trash goes out tonight. The electric bill is due Friday. At night, we'd fall into bed, exhausted. Our conversations were limited to tasks, bills, schedules. Kisses were quick, pecks on the cheek. Touches were mechanical. A brief hand on the back as we passed in the hallway. Something vital had been lost along the way. A spark, a connection, but I preferred to believe it was just a phase. A long, tiring phase that every married couple with young kids went through. We were in the trenches, I told myself. We just had to survive it. I remember one evening, about a month before everything changed. I was watching her as she stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the darkening street. The dishes were done. The kids were in bed. For the first time all day, there was quiet. She had this look on her face, distant, lost. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. She jumped slightly, startled. "Oh, nothing. Just thinking about how messy the garage is." "Oh." She turned away, busying herself by wiping down a counter that was already clean. The subject was closed. I let it go. I always let it go. It was easier than facing the fact that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't thinking about the garage at all. That feeling, that small, cold knot of dread in my stomach, started to visit me more often. I'd see her smiling at her phone, a private smile that wasn't for me. I'd hear her sigh when she thought I wasn't listening. I tried. I suggested a date night. She said she was too tired. I suggested a weekend trip for just the two of us. She said we couldn't afford it. Every attempt I made to reconnect was met with a practical, sensible wall. And I, wanting to be a supportive husband, would nod and agree. Yes, she was tired. Yes, money was tight. But inside, I was screaming, "Talk to me. Tell me what's wrong." But I never said it out loud. And in that shared silence, the cracks in our foundation grew wider every single day. Everything started to change on a Tuesday. A completely ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday. Ilara came home from work looking different. There was a strange light in her eyes, a mixture of excitement and something else I couldn't quite name. Nervousness, maybe. She didn't start on dinner like she usually did. Instead, she dropped her purse on the counter and faced me. "One of my friends from work is organizing a quick trip," she said, her voice a little too bright. "To Mallorca, Spain. The tickets are incredibly cheap." I blinked, processing the words. Mallorca. It felt like a place from another planet, so far removed from our world of PTA meetings and grocery lists. "A trip?" I asked. "It would only be for 4 days. A long weekend," she continued, rushing the words out. "Just something to, relieve some stress." I found it strange. Deeply strange. Ilara was a planner. She scheduled dentist appointments 6 months in advance. She was never impulsive, especially not with this kind of thing. "Is everything okay?" I asked, the knot in my stomach tightening. "Yes, of course," she said, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She started unpacking her work bag, avoiding my gaze. I just need some time for myself." The words hung in the air between us. For myself, not for us. I wanted to understand better. I wanted to ask more questions. Who was going? What was the real reason? But she deflected every attempt. She busied herself with the evening chores, creating a whirlwind of activity that left no room for a real conversation. 2 days later, she left. The morning was a blur. She kissed the kids with a fierce, loving intensity that made my heart ache. She hugged Liam so tight he squirmed, and she whispered something in Maya's ear that made her giggle. Then she turned to me. Her hug was cold, perfunctory. A brief, stiff embrace that was over before it began. "I'll call you when I land," she said, and then she was gone, wheeling her small suitcase out the door. I stood there in the doorway, watching her car pull away. The house felt suddenly, overwhelmingly empty. Anxious. I told myself I was being ridiculous. She deserved a break. 4 days wasn't a lifetime. But as I closed the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman who had just walked out of it wasn't the same woman I had married, and I was terrified that she might never be coming back. Not really. The first 2 days were tolerable, just barely. Ilara sent a few pictures, just as she'd promised. Beautiful landscapes with turquoise water, colorful, exotic-looking drinks with little umbrellas in them, group shots with her friends, their arms slung around each other. But in every photo, Ilara's smile seemed forced. It didn't reach her eyes. I responded enthusiastically to every single one. "Wow, that looks amazing. Hope you're having the time of your life. Kids, miss you. We're having pizza tonight. Your favorite. How's the experience going? Tell me everything." Her replies were brief, terse. "Everything's great. We're going to the beach. I'll tell you later." Always short, distant answers. It felt like I was talking to a polite stranger. The tightness in my chest grew with each message, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. It was as if the Ilara sending those texts was someone else entirely, a hollow echo of my wife. On the morning of her return, I woke up before the Sunday. I was buzzing with a nervous energy, a mix of excitement and dread. I got the kids ready, telling them, "Mommy's coming home today." Their happy squeals were a painful contrast to the anxiety churning in my gut. We got to the airport early. I bought the kids some snacks and we found a spot near the arrivals gate. Liam kept asking, "Is that her? Is that Mommy?" every time the automatic doors slid open. Finally, I saw them, her friends. The 3 of them walked through the gate, laughing and pulling their suitcases. I stood up, a smile spreading across my face, searching the crowd right behind them. But she wasn't there. I waited a moment, thinking maybe she was just held up at baggage claim. But her friends collected their bags and started walking toward the exit. Without her, my heart began to pound. A cold sweat prickled on my neck. Maybe she missed her flight. It happens. I approached her friends, forcing my smile to stay in place. "Hey, welcome back. Where's Ilara?" The smiles on their faces vanished. They exchanged a look, a quick, uncomfortable glance that told me everything before they even spoke a word. One of them, Jessica, took a deep breath. Caleb, Ilara decided to stay a few more days. The world seemed to slow down. The noise of the airport faded to a dull roar. "Stay? Why?" Jessica shifted her weight, unable to look me in the eye. She met some people, some friends. They invited her on a boat trip. "A boat trip?" I repeated, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "We tried to talk her out of it," the other friend added quickly. But she was determined. She booked another flight on her own. Then came the final blow. Jessica looked at me, her expression full of pity. "She asked us not to tell you, Caleb. She said she wanted to explain it herself." I stood there, frozen, speechless. My wife had extended her trip to stay with people she had just met, and she had asked her friends to lie to me about it. Why? The question screamed in my mind. I tried to hide my discomfort, to keep my composure for the sake of the kids, who were now looking at me with confused eyes. I thanked them for the information, mumbled something about talking to Ilara later, and walked away. The drive home was a silent nightmare. The kids, sensing my mood, were quiet in the back seat. My thoughts were spinning like a hurricane, a chaotic mess of betrayal and confusion. At home, Maya asked, "Where's Mommy?" I lied. The first of many lies. "Her flight was delayed, sweetie. There was a problem with the plane." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. That night, after the kids were asleep, I tried calling her. The call was refused. A moment later, a text message appeared on my screen. "I'm on the boat. No signal. I'll call when it works again." That was it. That was all I had. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark, I felt a kind of fear I had never known before. It wasn't just the fear of being lied to, it was the fear of being replaced. The fear that somewhere, on a boat in the middle of the ocean, I was losing my wife to a life, and maybe to a person, I knew nothing about. The following days were the most agonizing I had ever lived through. I worked on autopilot. I faked smiles for the kids. I went through the motions of our life. But inside, I was a wreck. a volatile mix of anger, fear, and utter helplessness. My mind became a torture chamber. I started replaying recent moments, searching for clues I had missed. The way Ilara seemed distracted, her eyes distant, her presence in a room feeling more like an absence. The times she mentioned feeling alive. I hadn't paid enough attention to those conversations. I had dismissed them as simple complaints, the normal stresses of life. Now, with everything I knew, it was impossible not to imagine the worst. When Ilara finally called, 2 days later, she acted as if everything was perfectly normal. Her voice was cheerful, light. She talked about the trip, laughing as she described the boat, the beautiful beaches, the amazing food. I listened in silence. I didn't ask whose boat it was. I didn't ask who else was there. I knew that if I asked, she would either lie, or worse, she would tell me the truth. And I still wasn't sure which one would be more painful. I wasn't ready for either. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of our bed and just stared at my phone for a long, long time. I felt a surge of violent anger, a desperate urge to throw it against the wall, to shatter it into a million pieces. But I didn't. Instead, I just put it on airplane mode. I needed silence. I needed to think. For the first time in our 15 years together, I felt a chilling certainty that maybe my wife no longer belonged to the same life as me. And that thought, that hurt more than any imagined betrayal. She arrived 3 days later than planned. Without warning, I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock, and my heart started pounding against my ribs. I was sitting in the living room, just staring at the floor. I didn't move. I waited, listening to her footsteps. When she entered the room, she casually said, "Hi," as if she were just returning from the grocery store. She bent down to hug the kids, who ran to her, screaming with joy. I remained quiet. I waited for them to go upstairs with her. I heard laughter, the sound of a suitcase being dragged across the floor, the shower turning on. Everything on the surface seemed normal, but inside me, everything had changed. The foundation of my world had been fractured, and I could feel the cracks spreading with every passing second. During dinner, she spoke little. She asked the kids about school, commented on the food I'd made, said she was tired from the flight. I watched her. I observed her gestures, the way her eyes avoided mine, the way she kept touching her phone, which lay face down on the table beside her. She didn't ask a single question about the days she had been gone. She didn't want to know if we had missed her, if I had struggled, if the kids had been okay. There was a hidden coldness there, disguised by automatic, empty phrases. I knew Ilara too well not to notice it. Later, in the bedroom, she was folding clothes, arranging objects from her suitcase. The silence was thick, suffocating. I couldn't bear it any longer. I broke it. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just stated a fact, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You extended your trip without telling me. Your friends told me." Ilara froze. Her back was to me, but I saw her shoulders tense. She didn't look at me. "I needed it," she said, her voice low. "I've been feeling trapped, suffocated, tired of the routine." She started talking then, the words spilling out of her. She talked about the pressure of being a mother, a wife, a working woman, about the expectations that no one seemed to acknowledge. I listened in silence, trying to understand, trying to find my wife somewhere in this stranger's confession. Then she said it. "I met some people on the island, and one of them, he was interesting." My stomach turned. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't say anything. Nothing physical happened. She assured me quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. "Just conversations. A connection." It was just an unexpected connection. A connection. I lay down on the bed without responding. The word echoed in my mind. A connection. It was a word that so neatly, so cleanly, tried to cover up a world of betrayal. In the days that followed, I tried to act normally. I dropped the kids off, picked them up, cooked dinner. But my mind kept spinning in circles. Ilara was on her phone more than ever. Sometimes she'd smile at the screen. Other times, she would go out for long walks alone. She started spending more time outside the house, making up appointments, saying she needed to think about herself. It was as if Ilara was physically present in our home, but her mind, her heart, they were living in another country, in another life. One night, I waited for her in the kitchen. I asked her to sit down. I told her I needed the whole truth, all of it. She hesitated. She took a deep breath, and then she started speaking, slowly. She told me about Julian, the man she had met in Mallorca. She said he was different, kind, attentive, that he made her feel alive again. She admitted she had gotten emotionally involved, but she insisted she had tried to keep things under control, that it had stopped there. I looked her straight in the eye. My voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. "Did you sleep with him, Elora?" She looked down at the floor, and for the first time, she hesitated for a long time before answering. The silence was her confession. Then she whispered it. "Yes." I didn't react immediately. I just stood there, frozen, as if time had stopped. Then, something inside me just shut down. I spent long periods in our room, just staring into space. I lost my appetite. I lost sleep. Ilara, on the other hand, seemed to grow increasingly distant. She stayed in the house, but she was a ghost. She avoided deeper conversations, went to bed late, and woke up early, as if escaping the routine had become her new routine. I thought about our good moments. Family trips. Late nights taking care of sick kids. The small surprises I used to plan for her birthday. All of it seemed so far away now. The marriage I thought was just tired was, in fact, mortally wounded. And Ilara was holding the knife. One random morning, long before dawn, I got up for a glass of water. On my way back from the kitchen, I saw her. Ilara was sitting in the living room, the faint blue light of her phone illuminating her face. She was smiling, a soft, private, happy smile. When she noticed I was watching her, she quickly hid the phone and said it was just a friend. I didn't say anything. I just turned around and went back to the bedroom. In that moment, I understood. As much as it hurt, I understood that something inside her had already left this house a long time ago. And maybe I needed to accept that before I lost myself, too. The next day, I spent the entire day trying to contain my anger. The lump in my throat was no longer sadness. It was indignation. I was exhausted from being ignored in my own home, from walking silently through rooms while Ilara acted as if I were a ghost. That situation had been dragging on, but on that day, something inside me broke completely. She passed me in the hallway without saying a word, holding her phone as if it were an extension of her body, with that subtle smile I now knew so well. It was the smile she used when replying to Julian. I took a deep breath and went to the bedroom. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and waited. When Ilara entered, taking off her shoes and quickly glancing at the notifications on her phone, I spoke. My voice was firm. "Enough." She stopped and raised her eyes, her expression cold, almost indifferent. I stood up. "I want a divorce." Amanda let out an ironic laugh. She crossed her arms and asked if I was serious. "I've never been more serious," I said, my voice steady. "I can't stand living with someone who treats me like a nuisance." Discovering the betrayal was bad enough. "Oh." She turned around, scoffed, and said, "You don't even know half of it, Caleb." I stared at her. "Then tell me. Because what I know is already enough to destroy any man with dignity." She threw her phone on the bed, stepped closer, and the venom came pouring out. "Fine. I've kept talking to Julian. Yes, he texts me every day. He's attentive. He listens to me. He makes me feel beautiful." Her voice dripped with contempt. "He's American, but he was just traveling with friends when he met me. And he's a millionaire, Caleb. A millionaire, something we are far from being." I clenched my fists at my sides, but I remained firm. She continued, her tone sharp and cruel. "You're always complaining about bills, dragging yourself through the days, always with that defeated look on your face. I'm done. I want more. And yes, I'm leaving. I'm going to be with him." She stood there, defiant, clearly expecting an impulsive reaction, a shout, maybe even a desperate plea for her to stay. But I just nodded slowly and left the room. Minutes later, I returned with a folder in my hands. I handed her the papers. "Sign," I said calmly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. It'll be simple, straightforward. You'll leave, and I'll keep the kids." She took the folder without a word. There was anger in her eyes, but also surprise, a flicker of shock. She never thought I would have the courage. Me, the man who always avoided conflict, was now standing there, firm, deciding our future for her. That night, Ilara slept in the guest room. The next day, she packed a few bags, kissed the kids hurriedly, and left without looking back. I watched from the window, feeling a strange, painful sense of relief. This was the woman with whom I had shared years of my life, but the person who was walking away, she no longer existed. The Ilara I had loved was gone. After the door closed, I went to the living room and sat on the couch. The kids were playing on the floor, blessedly oblivious to the upheaval that had just torn their world apart. I looked at them with a determination I hadn't felt in a very long time. Now, it was me. Just me. It was up to me to hold everything together. And for the first time, it felt possible. The next day, Julian sent a private driver to pick up the rest of Ilara's bags. She was already staying with him in a spacious, modern penthouse with a panoramic view of the city. Everything there sparkled. Everything seemed new. At first, Ilara felt like she was in a movie. Julian was gentle, affectionate, showing her every corner of the apartment with enthusiasm. He opened a bottle of expensive wine to celebrate their new beginning. They spent the first few weeks laughing, dining at fancy restaurants, and spending nights in absolute silence. The kind of silence she initially mistook for peace. But Julian didn't ask anything about her kids, or about her life before the trip. He talked a lot about his business, about helicopter rides, about investments. Ilara pretended to be interested, laughed at stories she didn't fully understand, trying desperately to fit into a world where everything seemed calculated. The freedom she had sought so desperately began to taste like distance. Julian treated her well, but distantly. He was polite, but absent. Sometimes he spent hours locked in his office on calls. Other times he went to events and came back late, smelling of perfume that wasn't hers. When Ilara tried to talk about something that was bothering her, he would change the subject, recommend a spa, or tell her she needed to disconnect from those small emotional tensions. Over time, it became clear. He liked her smiling version, the happy, carefree woman he'd met on vacation. Any other side of her, the sad side, the worried mother side, the human side bored him. And this coldness, so cleverly disguised at first, now imposed itself clearly. As Ilara sank into a quiet, luxurious regret, I was rebuilding myself from the ground up. With the kids now fully under my responsibility, I had to create a new routine. A new life. I woke up early. Before them, I'd prepare their breakfast, organize their backpacks, take them to school. And then, I started going for a run. Running became the first step toward my recovery. I used those moments to breathe, to think, to clear the hurricane from my mind. With every step on the pavement, I felt like I was leaving a piece of the pain behind me. Little by little, I rediscovered the will to live, not just survive. I bought myself a new shirt, a nice one. I got a fresh haircut. I made a conscious effort to stop walking with my shoulders slumped, and I picked up my old camera. Photography had always been a passion of mine, a passion I had forgotten under the weight of adult life. Now, it returned as a form of therapy. I started taking photos of landscapes, of people in the park, of simple, everyday details that suddenly gained beauty through the lens. I created a profile on social media, a new one, separate from the old life. I began sharing my images, writing small stories and reflections to go with them. The response was surprising. People commented. They praised my work. They shared my photos. It energized me. More than the likes, I was finding a voice, a path that was entirely my own. One Friday afternoon, while waiting in my car for the kids to get out of school, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Paige. Paige had been one of Ilara's best friends. Out of respect for their friendship, and probably a good deal of awkwardness, she had kept her distance since the divorce. The message was simple. Hi Caleb, saw your photos. They're beautiful. How are you? I hesitated before replying. For months, my standard answer to that question had been a lie. I'm fine. But this time, I decided to tell the truth, trying to learn how to breathe again. Paige sent back a sad smile emoji, and then she suggested coffee. Nothing fancy, just a talk. I accepted. The meeting was light, easy. We laughed about silly old things. We talked about the kids, about how life sometimes turns completely upside down when you're not looking. Paige listened without rushing me, without judgment. I always knew you were a good man, Caleb, she said softly. But, out of respect for my friendship with Ilara, I never got too involved. She paused, then added, now, however, I feel free to simply be here. And I truly am. The conversation started becoming frequent. Coffee turned into lunch, then another walk in the park. An invitation to meet the kids for ice cream, a trip to a children's movie. I noticed that with Paige, everything flowed effortlessly. She laughed at my bad jokes. She understood my silences. She didn't demand anything from me. The kids liked her from the very first day. Liam, my oldest, started calling her Aunt Paige, without anyone asking him to. Paige respected their space but was genuinely present. She showed her affection through sincere gestures, a handmade gift for Maya's birthday, an educational book for Liam, a story read with care before bedtime, and me, for the first time in a long, long while, I felt like I was being truly seen, without demands, without comparisons, without needing to prove myself all the time. It was strange to think that after so much suffering, something beautiful was emerging from the ashes. It wasn't an overwhelming, dramatic passion like in the movies. It was something better. It was a companionship that warmed me from the inside out, a bond built with respect, admiration, and gentle care. Paige looked at me and saw a whole man, even with all my scars. And as I saw my reflection in her eyes, I began to see myself that way, too. Meanwhile, Elara woke up startled by the sound of the front door slamming. Julian was leaving early again. He barely spoke to her anymore. Their conversations had devolved into grunts, short answers, a phrase or two between sips of coffee and his next business meeting. He had stopped looking her in the eyes. The touches had disappeared. The silent dinners became increasingly spaced out, until they turned into cold meals left in the fridge with empty notes. Elara spent most of her days alone in that pristine penthouse, surrounded by luxury but drowning in a loneliness that ate away at her from the inside. What once seemed like freedom now weighed on her like a prison with polished glass walls. She felt diminished, reduced to a visitor in a place where she was no longer wanted. She started to remember me, how I always listened, even when I was tired, how I'd make stupid jokes when she was sad, how I'd cook her something special on tough days, even if it was just mac and cheese from a box. She remembered the way I looked at her when she talked about the kids, how I always said, "You're an incredible mom," without needing to. Julian never said that. Over time, Elara began sneaking peeks at my new social media profile. She wanted to see the kids, to hear their voices. She watched the short videos I posted. The kids playing soccer in the backyard, trips to the park, mornings before school, and in one of them, she saw Paige. She was next to me, helping Maya with a science project at our kitchen table. They were both laughing. Elara watched the video in silence, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a regret that was a physical pain. Her throat went dry. Her vision blurred. She paused the video and pressed the phone to her chest, trying to breathe. She finally understood. She hadn't just left a tired marriage. She had left a home. Elara spent the rest of that day restless, pacing the cold marble floors of the penthouse. That evening, she gathered the courage to call me. I answered with a voice that was firm, polite, but distant. It was my business voice, the one I used with strangers. She asked about the kids, and I responded with matter-of-fact updates. They were doing well in school. Liam had joined the soccer team. Maya had lost a tooth. Elara tried to extend the conversation, asking if maybe we could meet to talk. "I think it's better to keep things as they are, Elara," I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. There was nothing left to say. "We can communicate about the kids through text." I thanked her for the call and said goodbye. Amanda held the phone in her hand for a long time, staring at the dark screen. For the first time since she left, I was out of her reach. And that, I think, is what finally destroyed her. 2 days later, she decided to show up unannounced. I was in the kitchen, helping Paige clean up after dinner, while the kids were watching a movie in the living room. The doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there she was. She looked thinner, her eyes tired. She was expecting, I think, to see the kids run to hug her. Instead, she just saw me. My expression was serious, unreadable. Behind me, Paige appeared in the hallway, holding a drawing Maya had just finished coloring. Elara froze. She tried to hide her surprise, but I saw her eyes tremble. I kept my composure. "Is there an emergency?" I wanted to talk," Amanda said, her voice shaky. I looked behind me, at Paige and the life I was building, and then I looked back at the ghost of my past standing on my doorstep. I took a deep breath and asked her to be direct. She tried to find the words, but everything came out jumbled. She said she missed the kids, that she regretted her decision, that Julian wasn't what she had imagined. She told me the man she had left everything for now treated her like an obligation, that she finally understood what she had lost. I listened to it all in silence. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't even feel pity. I just felt nothing. A quiet emptiness where my love for her used to be. I only interrupted when she finally said, her voice cracking, I just wanted a chance to come back. For us, for the kids. At that moment, I looked at her firmly. You made your choice, Alara. My voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of everything we had been through. The kids are fine, and so am I. She started to beg then, tears streaming down her face. She tried to grab my hand. I pulled back. I respect your pain, I said, and I meant it. But there's no more room for that kind of love here. What exists now is something else. I gestured with my head toward the living room, where the kids were now laughing at something silly on TV, with Paige sitting on the floor beside them, laughing with them. Alara looked, and I saw the sharp, unbearable pain flash across her face. It was the picture of the life she had destroyed with her own hands. I walked Alara to the gate. Before she left, I said one last thing, not with anger, but with a painfully firm finality. You didn't destroy our family, Alara. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears. You just gave me the chance to rebuild it the right way. She lowered her eyes, holding back a sob, and walked away without saying another word. Each step seemed heavy, burdened by the weight of her choices. Each memory, once a source of comfort, was now an open wound. And now, she understood. Love wasn't just the thrilling, heart-pounding feeling of a connection on a sun-drenched island. It wasn't the sparkle of a millionaire's penthouse. Love was what remained after the storm. It was the quiet companionship, the shared laughter over a child's drawing, the steady presence in the chaos of everyday life. She had traded it all away for something that didn't even last a season.